Hello, my name is Elizabeth Hill, and I am interviewing Jaime Chahin. Today is March 6th, 2019, and we are at the University of Texas at Austin. This is an interview for the Voces Oral History Project. To start off, can you tell me about the LULAC versus Richard case and your role in it?
In the LULAC versus Richards case, I was the lead witness for MALDEF against the state of Texas. That's probably late 1989 or so. It was in a Brownsville district court that I testified as the first witness for a period of about more than a day. I was in the witness stand testifying concerning the issue of higher education and the inequalities that exist in Texas.
How did you come to hold the role of the lead witness?
Well, I was the dean of students at Texas Southmost College back in 1985, and an executive from Xerox asked me if I wanted to be a senior policy analyst for the Select Committee of Higher Education of Texas for Governor White. So I came in 1986 to Austin as a senior policy analyst for the Select Committee of Higher Education. So I spent a whole year just studying the higher education system of Texas and holding hearings. And, I was a staff member, so I got to understand the historical development of institutions in the state of Texas. So when MALDEF was looking for somebody that could describe the different higher education systems of Texas, they asked me to play that role.
And so did you have to give up your position as dean to be on that committee and to hold that role?
Yes, I resigned as dean of students in Brownsville and came to Austin in January of 1986 to be a senior policy analyst for the Select Committee of Higher Education. In 1987, I started working at Texas State University, and then I think it's in 1989 when I became the lead witness.
Why did you decide to pursue that different part of your career? Like on that committee, why did you decide to study the history of discrimination?
Well, I always wanted to be a policy analyst, and I wanted to understand how public policy constructed systems and how public policy is used to distribute the public resources of the state. And I learned a lot of things. I learned that it was the type of institution that determined the resources that the institution received. In terms as institutions or universities have more academic programs, they have more formula funding and receive more funding than the others. So at that time in the 80s, you found that the institutions on the U.S.-Mexico border had very, very limited academic programs and choices for students. So students that were place-bound that could not come north to UT Austin or San Marcos, etc., did not have the same options in terms of academic programs and careers.
When they were not able to come north, those students, what did you usually see that they did instead, or where did they go?
Well, they were place-bound in their communities. They became teachers, businessmen, etc., but they couldn't go to law school or medical school, etc., because those choices didn't exist unless they had some upward mobility and they were willing to come north in the state of Texas to the institutions that had those academic programs.
How did being place-bound in that way influence those communities themselves?
Well, the communities that are, they have limited choices. There's limited economic impact as a result of the academic programs and the training that they provide for the workforce. Industries and companies will not go to places that don't have computer science, etc., or health programs that trains nurses or health administrators, etc., to run hospitals. All those choices, if you needed those degrees, you needed to go north to institutions that had those programs. And that limited the choices, and that limited the economic impact that a university has in a community because the programs were limited.
So you grew up in the South Texas region, correct?
I grew up in the U.S.-Mexico border in Eagle Pass, Texas. I was born there in 1952.
And so were you aware of that discrepancy, the disparity between what's in the north and what's in the south at that time, or when did you start to become aware of that?
I used to distribute the San Antonio Light a newspaper when I was 12 years old. And one day when I was 12 years old that I was wrapping the newspaper, I saw in the front page that Gus Garcia died. And Gus Garcia was a lawyer that in 1954 took the Hernandez versus Texas case to the U.S. Supreme Court and won the case. So that's the first time that I got introduced to inequalities because of that case. And I never forgot how important Gus Garcia was. He was a University of Texas law graduate that was a very prominent lawyer. As a matter of fact, in Harvard Law Review, it is documented that he tried the majority of the desegregation cases of Texas. So when I was 12 years old, I read about him. And he was at that time was living in San Antonio. He had already gone to the Supreme Court, because we're talking about the 1960s when he died. And the Civil Rights Act and everything was coming out, but they did a story on him. And because I got to distribute the newspaper, I got to read it. So that impacted me as a 12-year-old. I began to understand the world a little bit better.
Did you find that anyone else around you, teachers, your parents, were talking about that, or was it mainly a self-discovery?
Well, I had a high school teacher, Mr. Blanton from Freer, Texas. He made me read Black Like Me, about that reporter that changed the color of his skin to see how people were treated because of their color. That, my sophomore year in high school, also impacted me a lot. And then I learned that we had a philosopher that graduated from Eagle Pass High School, Jose Vasconcelos, who wrote the book, The Cosmic Race. So I went and I started reading that too. So I think reading exposed me to other information that made me ask questions. You know, and I recall that when I was in the first grade at Robert Lee Elementary, we were reading this book, and the name of the dog was Spot. And so I asked the teacher, I was like, how come nobody in my neighborhood has a dog named Spot? Well, we were all Hispanic. You know, there was no dog named Spot.
What was your teacher's response to that?
She thought I was different. I would ask a lot of questions.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific, you mentioned Mr. Blanton, correct?
Yeah.
His name. Was he the teacher that sticks out to you the most, or is there someone else that informed your time?
The professor Ricardo Salinas who graduated from the University of Texas, that taught me the regression equation when I was in high school. That helped me a lot in statistics as I went through graduate school, knowing the regression equation, knowing algebra and everything else. He made a big impact in my life. There was a Miss Riddle. Miss Riddle, another University of Texas graduate. I had good teachers, okay? Ms. Riddle was another, Mr. Salinas, Ms. Riddle were teachers, graduates at UT. They were in Eagle Pass. Ms. Riddle made me memorize a lot of poetry. And so when I was in Nicaragua with the secretary, with the State Department, I went to visit a communist institution. And the way I broke the ice was I asked, can you take me to the museum of Rubén Darío? And the president of the University of Nicaragua said, are you an American? I said, yes. Where did you learn? I said, well, he wrote Azul, blue. It's the name of the poem. And he said, very few people know that in the United States. I said, well, I do. And it was in Eagle Pass High School that I learned all about Azul and Rubén Darío.
Okay. Awesome. Did your teachers talk about higher education a lot, or did they talk about their students going on?
Yes, they did. And we had, at my high school, we had a project called Project Puerta Abierta, Open Door. And there you could go read all the university catalogs that you wanted to read. So I would go and read the college catalogs to get ideas about. I ended up with a baseball scholarship at Ranger Junior College on the side of Abilene because I thought I was going to be a professional baseball player, which didn't happen.
What did your family think about that? And what was their opinion?
Well, remember my family, the first 12 years of my life, I didn't go to school for 9 months. We were migrants, so we would leave in April and come back in September sometime. And we lived in Sidney, Montana, Pocatello, Idaho, Milton, Freewater, Walla Walla, Washington, Sunnyside. So where there was potatoes, asparagus, sugar beets, hops, we were there. So that was my experience until I was 12 years old. But I would see the snake in the Columbia River at 4 o'clock in the morning every morning in Pasco, Washington. So geographically, I was very well exposed. And that helped me a lot in school, the fact that we would travel through Utah, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, Montana, New Mexico. Yeah.
Did that influence your desire to, because I know you left South Texas to
Right.
go to school. You went to the University of Michigan and ended up
Right.
at Harvard, correct?
Right.
And so did that influence your decision to go to those places? How did you end up there?
Well, when I was admitted to graduate school, I was admitted to Trinity in San Antonio, and my father offered me a car if I would go to Trinity. And my aunt in Detroit said, no, University of Michigan is better. So my mother said, you should go to the best university you can go. My mother only had a 5th grade education. My father had like a 10th grade education. But they knew the difference education could make. And they pushed us and they supported us. We were very well supported by our parents in terms of, we didn't have a lot of resources, but whatever they had, they shared.
So how did you end up funding college for yourself? Did you have to do it for yourself?
My father became a United Steel worker with Reynolds Mining Corporation, and that helped. He started buying U.S. saving bonds, and that's how we paid for it. My first year was I got a scholarship in baseball. Then I finished my undergraduate in 24 months afterwards, so I only went to school 33 months to get my degree. So my father helped me out with U.S. bonds.
When you went to the University of Michigan and Harvard, did you experience any discrimination there? Did you experience any not believing in
I
you?
arrived in Ann Arbor in 1974 to graduate school on a full ride. And I spent most of my time reading books and writing and going to class. And that was my life. My stipend was $300, so my rent was $88. So I lived on the rest. And we were, I would call it a colony of Texans that we lived in a number of apartments. We were all in graduate school or law school or some type of graduate program, either education, social work, law, it varied. And we lived together and we formed the community, and that was our support system. And no, I didn't never feel discriminated in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
How did you decide to come back to Southeast Texas and be a teacher?
You see, when people ask me, why did you go to graduate school? Well, we went to graduate school to help others. I knew I wanted to help people. I didn't know how. And as I accumulated degrees, then I began to find out that I could be a professor or I could be a counselor or something, And I started at Uvalde Junior College as an instructor, teaching government at night. That was my first teaching job. I had been a teacher aide for Head Start when I was 19. At the end of my freshman year in college, I went back to Eagle Pass and was a Head Start teacher. And I realized that I needed to teach older people. I wasn't as capable of working with 5-year-olds. That was hard work. And so I ended up just continuing going to school, and then I started teaching at a junior college, and I started teaching at a university. And so the career went. And my 2 daughters are UT graduates. My brother's a UT graduate. So I moved my daughters when they were in 3rd and 5th grade to Austin, so they would have better choices. And they went to all the public schools in Austin and graduated from UT, went to law school, became lawyers. So that worked out okay.
Why did you feel drawn to teach older people?
I always thought about teaching and making a transformational difference in people. And I thought I can influence college students. And I think I still do influence college students. And I can see the benefits of that work as I look at their careers and how they continue professionally and what they become.
Are there any specific students or memories of times with students that stand out to you that you want to share?
There's one that emailed me yesterday. He's a DACA student. He's undocumented. He just published an article with me. I asked him to be the second author on DACA students in a book coming out called The Children of Prejudice. I got him a full ride to University of Michigan, and he went to the Gerald Ford School of Public Policy and got his master's degree. And now he's an education policy person for the state of Ohio. And he called me yesterday because he wants to explore a PhD, and we had a conversation about what are the choices and opportunities for a PhD in urban planning. And, he wanted to know if I had any contacts in Wisconsin or Ohio State or Michigan. So we had a discussion. He's one of the, I have some others that are professors already, okay, that I mentored and guided, and they become professors. I think he's in Boulder, Colorado, in child development. The more I think about it, I've hired professors that were my students. I have one right now that's a department chair that was my undergraduate student. And she now is one of the department heads in my college.
What emotional response do you have when you see people you mentored or have helped guide succeed and go on? What does that do to you?
Well, it gives me the energy to continue. My wife would like for me to retire. I'm not ready to retire, so I wouldn't know what to do with myself every day. But I think the public good in promoting the careers of students and promoting higher education and promoting graduate education, that's my moral conviction.
Where do you think that comes from?
I've learned that when you suffer and you make sacrifice, you appreciate and have gratitude for what Bill Moyers calls the other. Bill Moyers in his book, A World of Ideas, introduces the other. And the whole issue about how you assist people that are different, that perhaps have not had the same opportunities and choices that you had. So I think I have a moral obligation to open doors and create possibilities and opportunities for people that are willing to work hard and see themselves making a difference in other people's lives.
Was there a time that you felt discouraged or wanted to give up that goal?
No, I've never felt, I never entered into any activity not thinking that I would win. I have a very positive attitude. I always find a way to collaborate, to engage with others to make a difference. And as long as you create that public space and you facilitate opportunity for others, it'll come back tenfold.
So going back to the LULAC versus Richard case, when the verdict was eventually, when the trial was lost, what did that do to you?
Well, there was 2 trials.
Yes.
At the district court, we won. We lost at the Supreme Court. But what that allowed, it allowed the opportunity for dialogue and constructive conversations at the legislative level, so that South Texas got all these millions of dollars to develop the infrastructure for new programs for their universities. So in the long run, the public won, because the state was able to recognize that it was a good investment to invest in the development of the universities in South Texas, so that they could have the academic programs to create greater opportunities that would impact their students and their economy.
So immediately after that trial, can you walk me through a little bit about what started to happen? Like, what was the...
As soon as we won at the district level, the legislators here, the Mexican-American Legislative Caucus, the Senate Mexican-American, they started submitting bills and legislation, okay, requesting academic programs. There was a whole list of programs that the MALDEF report delineated for the state to develop. And naturally, the UT system and the A&M system became partners in that history. And they actually, those institutions became part of their systems, UT-RGV, UTEP, et cetera, UT San Antonio. Some of those were already part, others became part of those systems. Laredo, Kingsville became part of A&M system. And when they were, so when that was endorsed by the systems, there was a greater probability that new programs and legislative appropriation would come through to really build the infrastructure of those universities.
Did you see it as a positive thing that wider systems such as the UT system were putting their foot in South Texas rather than systems developing in South Texas themselves?
Well, the political dynamics of that process, the historical political dynamics of the process, it required Latino legislators to negotiate with those systems, and they did, behind closed doors, et cetera, to ensure that those institutions were getting additional academic programs that would impact the student body and impact, and I'm talking about schools of engineering that did not exist, pharmacy school that now exists. There's even a medical school now in South Texas. All those institutions were not there 25 years ago, and now they're there. But it was a result of those constructive legislative debates that occurred as a result of the court case. The court case created the opportunity to have those constructive discussions, even though in appeal they won. Mm-hmm. But the end result was there was the South Texas Initiative, which appropriated all these funds to add new programs in South Texas.
Did you experience any remorse from legislators or anyone apologizing for the ways that they had held people back?
No, no. As a matter of fact, let me tell you, when I went to testify, I had to take vacation. And I'm quoted in the Houston Post or Houston Chronicle after my first day of testimony. And my president started looking for me. But then I said I took vacation, and back then there was no law that said that you couldn't testify against the state of Texas when I did that. So I did it, okay. I was a state employee for the university, et cetera. But at that time, now there's a law that you can't do that. You cannot be a witness against the state if you're a state employee. But that happened to me. My chancellor called my president and said, "What is he doing in Brownsville?" Okay.
Did you experience any work setbacks because of that?
No, Dr. Jerome Supple was very supportive. He understood. As a result of the South Texas Initiative, we were even considered a South Texas institution. And the senator from Victoria was able to get some appropriations for Texas State University back then.
The people you worked with at that time, what was their reaction to you being in the case? Like your fellow employees, or were there any of them that weren't as motivated to?
Well, I was declared an expert witness, okay, by the courts, or they accepted me as an expert witness. So as long as I did it on my own time, I was okay. And I didn't ask permission from anybody.
Looking at the things that have happened since then, what is something you're particularly proud of that you've seen come about?
Well, I'm glad there's a pharmacy school and a medical school. I think those things are going to benefit the public, for the public good. They're going to train doctors that are going to stay there. They're going to train pharmacists that are going to stay there. They're going to train engineers. They're going to stay there and make a difference in their communities. And that type of professional careers are going to benefit the region and the communities where they work. And I think it was all worth it to go to court and testify and do all the things. I mean, there was like 20 or 30 other witnesses besides me, okay, that testified. I just sort of laid the foundation, for, the historical development of institutions so that people then could add and make arguments. Even San Antonio, it took San Antonio several years to get a school of engineering at UTSA. So they do have a school of engineering, but it's not that old, that school, okay? So change did come about.
What changes do you see that still need to be done?
Well, as the population grows, the changing demographics, they're going to have to determine how do they create other professional programs, optometry, law, etc. Those are, as communities grow, see, remember, when you develop a professional class, they have more income to give. So there's another effect there where all these Latino professionals, in one generation, they could become philanthropists and give to those institutions to promote the public good. So I see that as a possibility that in one generation we can develop philanthropy, so we can, or the people that have the resources will commit their resources to the betterment of those institutions, because it takes resources. And not only state resources, it takes private donors to give and support.
Can you tell me other ways that you have helped fight against minority discrimination or education disparity other than this specific case going forward?
Well, I do two things as dean. I hire faculty, and I make sure that we have diversity in our faculty hires, because students deserve the opportunity to have a diverse range of professors teaching them. That's very, very important in my mind. And I'm talking qualified people. One of the things that I have developed over the years is a national network where I have access. I just got a Chahin yesterday. One of my students, my USDA fellows, said, I'm finishing my PhD. I'm looking for a job. Well, I said, send me your vita, and I'll start sponsoring you and promoting. I do a lot of that. I've done that all my life. That's one way to influence the process and influence the public discourse and dialogue, so that that process contributes to greater diversity and equality in the systems. Because you have to be inside the system in order to influence that process. You cannot be outside the system and make a difference throwing rocks.
When you say the system, you're referring to?
Institutional systems, okay? But you can talk about a city or a county government or a legislative or a university. They're all systems. And you have to understand how they work, and you need to be inside those systems in order to make a difference and to advocate for your causes. And I spent all my life and all my career. That's how I ended up doing that film on colonias, and I got $1 million from Kellogg to do it. But I gave 100 kids a camera to document their social condition and then go testify before U.S. Congress. Well, one of those kids recently called me. He wanted his testimony. I said, what do you need your testimony for? He goes, well, I'm using it for my thesis at Berkeley Law School. I said, you just made my day. You know, that investment on that camera that I gave you, you know, back in the year 2000 has made a big difference because you're graduating from Berkeley. I said, so, and I realized that you can you can print or publish a peer review article, but you can also do a film, and a film has greater distribution, and you can impact more people with a film than with an article. I've learned that too. And in universities, they give you credit for being creative. So, you know, I went in, I wrote a proposal to Kellogg. They gave me $1 million. I gave 100 kids a camera. And then we went and filmed their neighborhoods. And that, you know, and I don't know anything about film, okay? But I knew who to film and why I needed to film them and why I needed to interview them.
What led you to that subject?
The fact that the late Jorge Chapa invited me to teach at the LBJ school, and we were teaching a course together, and he had just written a report on colonias, a 300-pager, and I said, who's going to read this? This is nobody. I said, well, let me read it. So I read it. I said, Jorge, would you allow me to use some of this data to write a proposal to the Kellogg Foundation to do a film? And he said, yes. So I did it and got funded. I've been very lucky that I always get funding, okay?
Can you define colonias for me?
Colonias are unincorporated neighborhoods that lack water, utilities, and infrastructure. And as a result, people have uninhabitable living conditions. So you have to build the infrastructure. They need utilities, they need electricity, they need water, sewer systems, etc. Those things are lacking. And you might still find in the 21st century some of those living conditions in the U.S.-Mexico border.
Were you aware of how bad things were in those areas until you did this film?
When I read the report, I became aware of the magnitude of the problem.
How did you see your film affect those regions?
Well, we showed the film, and the Water Development Board of the state of Texas, and I don't want to claim credit for it, funded all kinds of infrastructure projects for the colonias. So there was significant improvements because millions, and again, it was the legislators that passed the legislation to appropriate those funds to help colonias. So we inform and educate the public because we're about the public good, but it's the legislators that introduced the legislation to appropriate the funds to make those improvements in the colonias.
So who do you think has the greatest power in that equation? Is it the public? Is it the legislators? Who?
The public has to make the case and inform the legislators of the magnitude of the problem, whether it's water, education, health, etc., any of those problems. And then it takes courage and leadership from the legislators to go make a difference. And naturally, the economy has to be doing well in order to there to be resources to appropriate.
So going back a little bit to the time during the South Texas Border Initiative when that all was happening, do you think the public as a whole realized what was happening and realized the need for these cases, or was it mainly people in higher education?
In August of 1986, Henry Cisneros called a meeting, A Future of a Region, in San Antonio, where we outlined all the needs for public schools and universities for South Texas. And all the mayors, and superintendents of schools and deans showed up in San Antonio for a 3-day conversation. And it came out with an action plan. So there was serious legislative discussions. There was an understanding of the need because there was a demographic growth in the population, and these communities were beginning to grow. And they lacked the opportunities that other communities in the northern part of the state of Texas already had. Okay? But it was the legislative representation that created that opportunity to create the political dialogue so that public funds would be invested in this region of the state of Texas.
Do you think having minorities on the legislative board is crucial to that happening?
Definitely crucial. It was the legislative leadership of South Texas that influenced in a very significant way the process of appropriations. No question about it.
What does the legislative board look like now in terms of minority?
The representation is the same. The problem is now they're in the minority. They're in the minority party, but they're still asking and demanding things. Okay, but remember, you have 150 members in the House, so you need at least 78 votes to pass anything. Okay, so that's the process. And likewise in the Senate, you need a majority to pass things. So there's an ongoing public debate and discourse, but perhaps the legislators are not as effective now as they were in the 80s and 90s.
Does that surprise you that they've become less effective than they were?
Well, it wasn't supposed to be this way, but political winds change. I mean, they change, and you have to accept that. In a democracy, the winner calls the shots. And we're not in a position to call the shots right now.
You served as a political analyst for a while. Why did you feel more called to stay in higher education than to work on the policy side of things?
I wanted to be closer to students, to impact them, to make a difference in their lives. And education is clearly the conduit to influence the public good and to influence the next generation of leaders that are going to make a difference.
Have you always believed that?
I strongly believe it. As a matter of fact, this past weekend I took 15 graduate students to California. That's a lot of work. And I asked myself, why am I doing this? It's for the public good. Yeah, and I flew them over there, and we went to the University of California, Riverside, to the Agricultural Research Lab. We we did an elevator speech in 5 minutes, and we did a number of things.
Why California? Why that trip?
Because USDA funded it, and that's where the research lab is at the University of California, Riverside.
I read that you have a program called Caminos.
That's it. That's what I'm
that's
talking
the
about right
program?
now.
Okay.
I've had it at different levels. I have it for 5-year-olds in early childhood education, because I think if we're going to intervene somewhere, we should make sure that all 5-year-olds are school ready and at grade level by the time they get to the 3rd grade. So that's Caminitos. Then I had Caminos for junior high students, where I gave them 3 hours of algebra daily, and that's based on my theory of the regression equation and what happened to me with algebra as I was growing up. So I did that for 8 or 10 years. And now I'm doing Caminos for graduate students in STEM, in nutrition, agriculture, and biology. And we provide a career institute, and we pay for some research that they conduct. And again, our goal is that 50% will go to a PhD program. And we're very close to that goal.
How did you develop that program? How'd that come about?
Well, I met with USDA, and they said, we need PhDs to work for USDA. And we would like for them to first, when they're in graduate school, to do internships and complete graduate studies. So my project it's a small grant, about $275,000. We identify students that are writing a thesis in biology, nutrition, or agriculture. We select them, we put them through a process, and we select them, and then we take them to a research lab so they can see, and they're required to apply for a USDA internship.
The students that were 5 in junior high, those ones, how did you select those students?
The way we select them was that the students that were not able to do algebra, I call that criteria having potential, and the parents would have to sign a contract with me that they would require their son and daughter to take 3 hours of algebra daily with tutoring, an English course, a technology course, and a leadership course. And I would feed them in the dorm at the university. So I did all of that for 6 weeks. And every Saturday we had a field trip to a technology company here in Austin. And I would select about 75 8th graders every summer. I couldn't go on summer vacation because I had that project.
You said earlier that you didn't like teaching young kids when you first started teaching. You had a hard time with younger kids. Why did you decide to start those programs?
Well, because let me tell you, I am convinced that if you are successful in kindergarten through 3rd grade and you're reading at grade level, you will be successful through high school and college. I am convinced all the literature that I've read. So intervening with 5-year-olds is critical. At the university, the Child Development Program reports to me. So I've been able to invest in faculty that are experts at that. And they're working with Caminitos at the Child Development Center there in San Marcos, okay, with some of my funding. But I think that will make a difference, okay? Junior high is critical. The 8th grade is critical. Being successful at math when you enter high school is critical, in my opinion, again, from the literature I've read. So I try to be strategic in my investments or my projects so that I can make a difference in people's lives.
Were any of those influenced by you when you were younger? Did you struggle in any of those areas?
No, I did not struggle, but I had good teachers in algebra and in reading, etc., that influenced me and that I figured they made a difference in my life. So I had to go and make a difference in other people's lives.
It sounds like you've actively sought out not being comfortable and instead just sought to keep going and finding new ways to help. Is it ever hard to stay motivated to do that, or is it sometimes you just want to?
I think I'm a natural risk taker, and I'm also somebody that continuously tries to solicit resources to make a difference. Like I give 4 people from Eagle Pass $1,000. I don't select them, they get selected. The only requirement is they get admitted to Texas State and they get $1,000 from me. And I do that because I want to see somebody from Eagle Pass replace me at one time or another. Okay, we're all replaceable and we move on to another future. But I believe in investing in people and investing in people from my own community where I grew up to see what happens. Recently, I was having a discussion with a professor from MIT here at a funeral in Austin. And I said, most of the Hispanics at MIT come from where? I said, from Eagle Pass. Because Mr. Roberts in the 1960s started a program to send Hispanic kids from Eagle Pass to MIT. I said, and literally by now, more than 100 have graduated from MIT. And that's not supposed to happen. Because it's a border school district, but Mr. Roberts made a difference. And it stayed forever imprinted in my mind that he cared and he was willing to identify talent and guide them and send them forward.
How is Eagle Pass different now than when you grew up?
Eagle Pass now has 50,000 people. They have 2 high schools. They still have good teachers, okay, that are committed to their locals, that they come back and they're invested there. That's very, very important. And we have very nurturing families that nurture their children, protect them, support them, etc. And I think that they're not as assimilated as people in Central Texas because they're in the U.S.-Mexico border and they get a constant stimulation of the other culture. And I think that's good, that they live in a multicultural world.
Students who don't have that, what do you...
They should seek that. I send my daughters back to Mexico to learn Spanish very intentionally because I thought that was important for their careers. To do that, one of the oldest ones, when she came to YouTube, she picked up Farsi. Okay, and when she was in Turkey listening to political asylum requests from people from Iran, she could understand what they were saying. She's now in Los Angeles, still doing the same thing, political asylum.
Are you bilingual?
Yes.
Okay, so how has your experience speaking Spanish influenced your life? How has it positively pulled you forward?
Well, I'm able to go to a mariachi concert and sing in public in front of my president. She's seen me sing. The mariachis invite me to sing. I guess I am, it doesn't bother me to be bilingual and to change from English to Spanish or do both simultaneously. I've actually published some papers in Spanish in Chile where I've given speeches completely in Spanish, very technical information that I've translated. It's a challenge, but it's doable. But it was that socialization process where I grew up, being bilingual was an asset. We never saw it as a deficit, and I still don't see it as a deficit. And I see a lot of young people that are totally assimilated, they're losing their language and their culture. And I keep telling them and reminding them that it's important to keep your culture and your language.
Why do you say that?
Well, Thomas Jefferson said, bestow great credibility on the Spanish language because that's the language of the Americas. And he was right. It is the language of there's more people speaking Spanish than English when you think about it in the Americas, okay? And I think it's important. I think English is important, but so is Spanish.
It's a beautiful quote. Going back a little bit, you said before that you were a risk taker. When are times that you've specifically failed or initiatives you've wanted to do haven't taken off?
I've been trying to start a national Hispanic virtual reality lab. I've written the proposal and they told me no, but I'm still looking. I failed one time, but I've always had the capacity to get up and go look for another approach. And that's constant. You cannot learn without failure. Failure is constant, but the key is to win the majority of the times. You gotta have a 51% winning record in all you do in order to sustain yourself for a long period of time. And I've been able to do that in my career. And I think everybody does. But you got to keep on tracking. If you fail, you got to get up and seek other opportunities or other avenues or a different approach. Sometimes you reconceptualize what you conceptualize. And as I learn more about technology and virtual capacity, see, I want to be able to zoom myself into the community center in Eagle Pass and talk to 500 parents about how do you go to college. That's my goal. And I need to create it. And I need to create it in English and Spanish, because there's going to be people in that room that don't know any English, and there's going to be people there that only speak English. Some will speak only Spanish, some people. So I have to have the capacity to do both.
Why do you think people don't see the need for it yet, like you do?
Well, because people take things for granted. There's so much good information out there on how to do things right that benefit the public good. The question is, how do we take that information and share it with the public, with those that don't have access to the information, so they can grow with us? Because, you know, when you build the assets of the community, you build the assets of everybody. And it's the public good, and they will have a skill, they will have a job, they'll have an education, and they will help others. That's my philosophy as to why we do things. But I see too much good information and knowledge out there that a lot of people do not know about because they don't have access to technology and information. And when we provide that access to technology and information, we're going to make a difference.
When you meet people that aren't as motivated as you to fix these problems, how do you respond to those people?
I have a very simple little Spanish word, and I really borrowed it from the movie Stand and Deliver, okay? The movie Stand and Deliver said ganas, okay? So I added another word to ganas. I said échale ganas, okay? So that's how I tell people that are not motivated. You got to make an effort, or else nothing will happen.
I'm going to look through some of these questions right here and see what questions the rest of the team has for you.
All right.
Can you first clarify what is the National Hispanic Lab and what you're wanting to do with it?
The Virtual Lab.
Yes, the virtual lab.
Is a lab that will disseminate information to parents and families about financial literacy and how to pay for higher education.
Will it disseminate it to specific places?
We can target rural areas that lack access to technology. That would be one of the goals.
Can you tell us more about your projects, your film projects? You told us a little bit about the colonias one, but can you elaborate on the other one?
On the legislative project on the struggle for equality and opportunity, what I decided to do was go back to a University of Michigan graduate, J.T. Canales, who was in the legislature in 1905 and had the hearings on the Texas Rangers here in the early part of the 20th century. He's an 1899 Michigan law grad. And there I got the idea of how he fought for equality. So I decided to interview at least 20 legislators and ask questions about their experience in the legislature and how they had promoted the public good and what legislation they had introduced to make things better for their communities. So that project, I interviewed 20 legislators, and I put the film on. We showed it here at the Bob Bullock Museum, and then it went on PBS. That was 2007 that I did that film. I was funded by AT&T, okay, and Anheuser-Busch. I always get funding. So that's how that happened. And the intention was to inform and educate the public that there was a legislative history, and there had been a history of Latino legislators promoting legislation for the public good and for their communities.
Is there a standout legislator that stands out in your mind?
Well, I interviewed so many. I didn't get to interview Irma Rangel, okay, who mentored me when I was an undergrad because she passed. But when we did the top 10% plan, I was part of her team, okay. I interviewed legislator Eddie Cavazos. I interviewed Henry Cuellar, who's now a congressman. I interviewed Truan, who's now passed, used to be in the Senate. I interviewed folks from El Paso. A lot of these people have passed away. I interviewed Senator Joe Bernal, who's still alive in his 80s or 90s. He's in my film. And again, I interviewed women and men trying to identify their passion, their legislative interests, and how their legislation made a difference.
What do you think is the importance of preserving those people's stories?
I think the leadership journey of our community, that story needs to be told to the next generation so that they know that there was people out there that had the courage to try to make a difference in other people's lives.
That's great. That's really great. I heard you say that you were involved in the top 10% plan. Can you tell me a little bit about your role in that?
Well, there was a number of professors that were advising Irma Rangel on that plan. David Montejano was a leader, Michael Olivas, myself, there was others that were involved, and giving her guidance and advice concerning the plan, okay? Because there had already been a legislative plan in another state. So we were, taking ideas from other states and sharing that with her, and she was able to pass it. Yeah.
Can you, just for the video, can you clarify what that plan is and what the impact of it has been?
It gives you automatic admission if you're in the top 10% of your high school class. So as my statistics professor said, it's not knowing how to count, it's knowing where to count. So if you realize that the demographics are changing of the public schools in Texas and more Latinos, are enrolled in the public schools of Texas, you realize that if you take 10% of that, you'd have greater numbers than using the other criteria of admissions. So it was a legislative move that worked. There've been modifications and changes to it, okay? But ultimately, it made a difference and made people think about if you're in the top 10% of your class, you're automatically admitted, okay? Hopefully that high school education that you receive has given you the foundation to be able to compete.
And if it did not prepare you well for that, what do you think? What is your reaction to that?
Well, we all should have the opportunity to fail too, and to know why we fail and learn from our failure to then improve ourselves. A lot of people, they're not able to adjust to the transition to college. They have the aptitude to learn, but they're not able to adjust. And other people are more mature and more disciplined, and they're able to adjust. Naturally, first generation students need all the guidance and advice on how to navigate an institutional system.
Now, on the level of a dean, how do you pinpoint students that are particularly failing or having trouble succeeding and help them?
I work with students individually, one-on-one, when it needs to be done, and I give them guidance and advice and access to resources where they can get help, tutoring, whatever they might need, or a job. So they come for me for tutoring, a job, or a letter of reference, or to appeal their suspension. I deal with all of that. And we have very constructive conversations, and I tell them, what are the requirements and expectations, and how do you go about solving your problem? Because my goal is not only to recruit students, but to retain them and to graduate them.
And is it easier or harder as a dean to do it than when you were a professor and more up close with those students?
No, as a dean, I have greater access to more resources. I know where the resources are. I know who my faculty support, where I can send them to what professors, et cetera. So it's a lot easier as a dean than as a professor. I don't see as many students because I'm not in the classroom as much as I used to be, but I still see students and I solve problems.
One of these questions is, what is the next issue in education that you think needs to be addressed?
How do institutions adapt to technology to provide greater access to students and to teach them? And how do we balance technology and knowledge and information to the real experience, to engage students in a discourse, in an intellectual discourse that is not about saying, I like you or anything like that, but it's about knowledge and information. How do we share it with them so they can use it to make a difference in their lives and other people's lives, and so they can have employment opportunities that will lead to a stable lifestyle in their lives. And I think institutions of higher education are going to be challenged by technology. Technology and information is moving faster than institutions. And the question is, how do you adapt and how do you construct systems that uses both technology and regular instructional delivery systems?
How is it being challenged? How is the education system?
Well, there's private entities that are not now competing for students, okay? And legislatures are investing less in public education as we speak, okay? So it's very, very important that you have a good competitive program that can compete against private schools, that is accessible to the public, to the taxpayers, so that education becomes prevalent as a public issue and a public need that the taxpayers need to support.
In your own school, how do you go about doing that?
Well, what's happening in our university is we have programs now that are totally delivered online, and others that have hybrid courses, and others that have a few courses. And naturally, you need to have the faculty capacity to deliver those types of programs. And you need to have the technology infrastructure to deliver those kinds of programs. And in some programs, you have greater capacity than others, but you move in that direction to give the students choices. A lot of freshmen now, they want to stay in their dorm and take their class from their dorm bed, okay? And you give them that option, or they can show up to class to a regular physical classroom. They have those options.
That's great. It's really interesting. This is going back a little bit, but I love this question. You said you didn't have dogs named Spot in your neighborhood.
Right.
What were the names of dogs in your neighborhood?
Wow, that's a real good question.
It's a great question.
Yeah. Pinto, because the dog, really, Pinto means spot too, okay? The dog has multicolors. So Pinto, yeah, Apache. And I just thought about this. I lived in Austin Street when I was in the 3rd grade. I went to Robert Lee, and there was 2 dogs. Those were the names of the dogs, okay? And they would, at Robert Lee in 1st grade, you had to read My Little Red Book, My Little Blue Book, and even the kids that were in the book were all blonde. That was the other thing. I never asked anything about that, but the dog I did notice when I was growing up. And now there's children's books that have Spanish names and characters and all of that. All of that has changed. Yeah.
Do you find those, like books that have greater majorities of minorities in them, do you find that those are being taught at your university more, or they have?
I established the Tomas Rivera Children's Book Award, where we give writers that write those books a $3,000 stipend, and they get a national competition. That program is 20 years old at Texas State. I was able to raise $100,000 from Anheuser-Busch to start it. And it's still there. And they select the best writers in the country that are writing about Latino subjects and Latino children.
You seem to have a lot of initiatives that you've started or been a part of. Is there a certain one that you are proudest of to have played a role in?
I think the Tomas Rivera Children's Book Award is something that will be at Texas State forever, okay? And I think that's good. I'm sure they're going to be challenged by technology too, in terms of how are those books printed, and how will they come out in the future? Will the digital era overcome hard books? I don't know. But to me, all I want them to know is when people go to Texas State, they knew that I passed through there, that I was there, and that my footprints are all over the place. That's probably the only legacy that you leave.
Do you see yourself ever returning to South Texas?
My grandchildren are in Austin. My daughter's in Austin. My wife is here. So I go visit South Texas. I go visit Eagle Pass. My parents are buried in Mexico. So I still go to Eagle Pass. But no, I have never thought, I think I'm going to stay here in Austin. Yeah. Unless they offer me something that is spectacular. I just haven't had that spectacular opportunity offered to me.
You said earlier that it's hard to help change something unless you're in something, like unless you're in the region itself or the institution.
You have to be in the system to make a difference. I learned from those 50 kids from Edcow Chelsea and 50 kids from El Paso that I gave them cameras. They're still my friends. They were 14 when I selected them. Now they're 28, 29. Okay, and they're still things that in touch with me. Some of them, I get emails from them. Yeah, one just is leading a program on Parkinson's in McAllen, Texas. So I want to donate some money because he asked me, but he stayed in touch that way. He's with the McAllen Chamber of Commerce and all that kind of stuff.
So you believe that even without being physically in the region of South Texas, you can still make a difference in that place even now?
Well, if people seek your advice and you give them advice, you can influence the process, okay? I don't take myself too serious. I laugh at a lot of things, okay? Because you gotta add humor to everything. But in certain places, I know leaders that I can talk to, that they can influence the process. Because I believe in three things. You gotta be on time, you gotta be on task, and you gotta build relationships, because life is relational. You don't do anything by yourself. That's my philosophy.
How did those develop?
Lessons from my mother and my father, punctuality, being on time, finishing the assignment and the task, and then this thing about relationships, that life is relational. And you learn professionally and career-wise that, yes, it is. It is relational. And you don't know when the person next to you, sitting next to you, is going to be the person you're going to ask a reference from. And I really believe that. And I tell my students that. Right now I have a graduate student that has never made a B in his life in nutrition. He's a biology chemist. And I just convinced him in the trip to California that he needed to get a PhD. And yesterday he came to my office and, I talked to my mother, I'm going to do it. Because he thinks he's too old at 28. And well, you're single and you're brilliant. So you're smarter than me, so you should be an MD or a PhD or something. I said, so take the next 3 or 4 years to do it. But it took me the trip to convince him. I've been telling him for 8 months, every day that he comes to the office. But,
What people that know you, what do you think they would say is most important to you?
Being proactively making a difference in other people's lives, if they really know me, okay? Yeah. There's a sociologist that recently wrote about a page and a half on me, interviewed me and wrote it. I don't know what she's going to do with it, but she wanted to know a lot of things about me. Yeah. So she interviewed me and she wrote it and showed it to me. Looked good. It was the truth. So we'll leave it at that.
Are you're happy about the way she portrayed you?
Yeah, I thought she did a good job. And the most interesting thing, I was giving a presentation at the Rackham Graduate School at the University of Michigan. And she was a PhD student. She came forward, said, I'm so-and-so, and here's my vita. I'm looking for a job. Well, she's now a full professor at Texas State. And we met at the Rackham Graduate School. I had never met her in my life. So now she wrote that essay like 10 years later.
That's awesome. What advice do you have for current generations working in advocacy on behalf of Latino issues?
Pick your battles. Be constructive. Listen to the other. And develop an action plan and act. And as long as you win more battles than you lose, you're going to be fine.
Mm-hmm. What issues do you think people advocating now, what problems do you think they're going to experience?
I think DACA is the greatest civil rights issue of the 21st century. I think that's one issue. I think food security for students in colleges. I have something called Bobcat Bounty funded, what we're doing. I just was reading a report. We provided 3,000 bags of groceries to 1,000 people. Well, the students did. I don't do any of that, but I funded it. And I think that's an issue at university that people would take for granted that college students are doing okay. Well, they might have some food security issues because the cost of education has gone up, the cost of living has gone up, and sometimes they lack resources. But food security to me is an issue. DACA is an issue. Yeah.
Food security, do you think that's only in certain parts of the state that people are struggling with that?
I found it in San Marcos. I would not be surprised that it exists at UT Austin. Okay. The other thing that we need is civic engagement. Okay. We need to understand the mission of the nonprofits and why they do things and why we have volunteers, and try to continue to increase the volunteer participation of citizens. As a matter of fact, I see myself in the next stage of my life of becoming a volunteer, probably. Yeah, at a food bank or somewhere like that.
Why do you want to do that?
Well, I have the other choice also with my grandson as being a Little League coach. That's a good idea too. Okay. But I gotta stay busy. I'm the type of person who will need to stay busy. I probably might end up still teaching, a course here and there. I love to teach. I like to have students in a room and says, what's the magnitude of the problem? In my social legislation class, I talk about what's the magnitude of the problem, and then what does that mean? Well, for something to be a social problem that receives public funding, it has to have magnitude. It cannot be a personal problem. It has to be society's problem that we deal with. So I like that conversation. I love to have it with students about what's fundable, what's not, and why not, and who advocates for what, and how do you make your case.
Is there a student you've talked to recently that's had a particularly good answer to that question?
There is no wrong answer, but there is an answer that you need to quantify or qualify. You need to provide quantitative data to make your case for your social problem, and you qualify it with examples of people.
You mentioned the regression equation a lot during this time. Is that related to what you just said?
Well, the A plus BYX, the formula for the regression equation stays on my mind because when A is something, what is B? Can you, based on the A grade, can you predict what B is going to give under certain conditions, mathematical conditions? And it's always stayed in my mind.
Do you find that it applies to most situations, or?
Yes, there's two sides to every story. And you have, as I indicated earlier, you have to listen to try to decipher fact from fiction. What is a story and what is a fact? And then if you're able to integrate those things, you might be able to find a viable solution that is inclusive of everybody. Because this is about inclusion.
Do you have found that it is easy for you to keep your personal feelings towards situations out of your advocacy? Or?
It's very hard work. That is very hard work, but if you learn with wisdom and experience to sit back and listen, you're able to pull yourself away and get a better picture of the situation and how you're going to manage it or how you're going to improve it.
Can you tell me about a time that you did that poorly and then did it well?
When I do things poorly is when I act real fast with a sense of urgency. But as I've gotten older and gained more wisdom, I pull back. And I've learned that listening and pulling back, I can make the most constructive decision that probably will make a difference in somebody's life. And, well, even telling somebody to get a PhD, how do you tell them in a way that you're not pushing them? That they find they're enlightened by themselves. Oh, I can do this. Well, I took this gentleman to a meeting where he saw all these PhDs say things. And then one of them said, "You're so smart, why don't you get a PhD?" I don't think anybody had ever called him smart. And he came in Monday to my office. He goes, I thought about it, went and talked to my mother, San Antonio. I'm going to do it. I said, fine, you can do it. I said, but go do a lot of research before you decide where you go. I said, because you're going to commit 3 to 4 years of your life, and you're going to be poor. So if you're looking for cars and that kind of stuff, it's not going to work. And you can't afford to get married and have children and do that. It's almost impossible. Not impossible. I've seen people do it, but it's almost an impossible task to do something like that.
How have you done it?
I was single. Yeah, when I had my PhD, I got married. But I had the degree in my hand. And I had a job.
Have you found that what's been your wife's journey through?
She taught English for 30 years, retired. She has a master's degree. Her parents wouldn't let her go to Michigan with me. I tried to recruit her, but then they thought, no, you come home and marry her. Old school stuff, okay? So we're going to be married for 40 years. Yeah. But she tolerates me, and she understands that I'm a little bit different. Yeah.
You say it's important to listen and have that be something that's integral to you. Who is someone that you're listening to right now you're really influenced by?
There's a linguist who's 80 years old that I consult with. Most of my mentors are 15 to 20 years older than me. And I consult with them. I visit them. As a matter of fact, one of them wrote 19 novels, and I'm in his first novel. I'm in it. I was in his class as an undergrad, and he lives about 10 miles from here. And I'm going to go have breakfast with him Sunday. He's 90. He's 90, 1929, so he's 90 years old. Okay, and for some reason, since I was 15 years old, I've always hung around older people. And I think that's been good for me. But learning how to listen takes time and experience and failure. Yeah.
During the time of the South Texas Border Initiative, the lawsuit and that whole situation, do you think you were good at it at that time? Like good at listening, good at waiting, not getting emotional?
I don't think I ever got emotional about it, and I did a lot of listening. I didn't have as much wisdom then than I have now, because I have a lot more experience now than when I was 34 or 35 years old. But I think that's part of your professional development, and now I'm able to see a graduate program and say, well, the reason it's not working is because it doesn't have the infrastructure or the resources, the money to hire the right faculty to make it work. I don't think we have this type of technology in the valley, the one we're sitting in here. But you don't have the philanthropical donors like below in the valley. And that's what I'm saying. That professional class of engineers, doctors, and pharmacists, they will become that group. But it takes time.
When do you think we can expect to see that start to happen?
Well, there was a donor of $10 million for the medical school in the valley, which I thought that's a start. But there's others that haven't come up to bat for whatever reasons. So there is that mindset that if you invest strategically in public institutions, there is a payback to the whole community. I think people understand that, but it takes time. Norm Hackerman, the chemist, president of the University of Texas, in 1986, when I was with the select committee, in a public meeting, he said, it takes one generation to enter the system successfully. He was talking at that time about minorities. And I was listening very carefully to him, and I said, it makes sense what he's saying. My children, it's a lot easier for them than it was for me. And I'm hoping that my great-grandchildren will have it a lot easier navigating the system. Why? Because there's experience, wisdom, and resources. If you have experience and wisdom and resources, you can do a lot of things.
Do you think if the Supreme Court case for LULAC versus Richards had been won at that time, they would be farther along than we are now?
That's a good question. Because the question was, at that time, the economy was not as good as it is now.
The economy where?
In the state of Texas. So resources, because you got to go to the taxpayers for resources, there's got to be money. Like right now, we have a very significant surplus, okay, in the state of Texas. The rainy day fund or whatever they want to call it, but there's a surplus. The question, where is that going to be strategically invested to make a difference on the economy of the state of Texas? And what I see from the newspapers, public education is one of those items.
So just to clarify, you think they're doing a better job of it now? Is that what you said, when at the time there wasn't the funds to do it?
No, I'm saying that they need to make some strategic investments to make a difference.
Right now.
Yeah, right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The resources, not enough resources were there in 1989 or 90 as there is now.
If you were making the decision, where would you put those resources?
I would invest in public education, early childhood education, and higher education. Those three institutions need investment, public investment, and expectations to continue to train the next generation of workers for the state of Texas.
Do you think in South Texas currently there's still, are there still misconceptions about South Texas now? And why do they exist?
I don't think there's any misconceptions. I think that if there's 1 million people in the valley, those 1 million people pay taxes, and they're consumers and they're professionals, and they're contributing to their community. And I think now if you go to McAllen, Texas, it doesn't look any different than Austin. Okay, it looks the same in terms of what's there for the consumers. Okay, what's not there is a technology company and big industry. It's not there in a significant way. But the health industry is there in a very significant way. The university has a medical school now, it's in their 3rd or 4th year. So things are changing. Agriculture is less and less.
That's great. What do you think it's, for students now, if you could tell them what to study or what to get into, what would you want?
I would recommend STEM, technology, or an education that will make them adaptive to the changing economy. Because I think if you can read and write and understand technology, you can find employment with companies that need people with those skills. You might not be an engineer or a computer scientist, but if you're literate and you're able to read and write and edit, you can contribute to the workbooks that all those companies generate.
How have you yourself kept up with those new changes, new information?
Let me tell you, keeping up with technology is hard. From your smart cell phone to your computer in your office, and learning how to look for things, how to use Google, etc. But I'm constantly asking questions. I ask Google all kinds of things, okay? And I get answers. I don't necessarily believe everything they're telling me, but it gives me another answer to a question to go look for other information. I think you have to be continuously learning. You cannot quit reading and writing. I just finished reading the book Marfa. And I found a 1930-something graduate of St. Edward's, and I went to his store in Presidio when I delivered the commencement speech for the high school class. They took me to his store. Well, he's in the book, and he recently died. And he has a son that I need to call who's a medical doctor here in Austin, went to Notre Dame. But they come from Presidio, Texas, a little border town. Okay? But he's in the book Marfa, and I didn't realize until I read it that there was a three-page story on him there.
Are your daughters, you have 2 daughters, correct?
Right.
Are your daughters involved in education at all, in educational reform?
My daughter Claudia is leading the preeclampsia project here in town.
Can you tell me what that is?
That's for women who have newborns that end up in prenatal care because they're too small. She had a daughter and a son, but they're fine now. So she's leading that cause. She just took a job with University of St. Augustine as their lawyer. They do physical therapy, communication disorders, etc. The other one works for the U.S. Department of Justice, listening to political asylum requests in Los Angeles. Yeah. So in a way, they have a little bit of social work and education in their jobs. Yeah. You never know.
Absolutely. In 100 years from now, do you think it's important that people remember the specifics of what happened during this time, or would you be okay if they just knew how it had changed?
History is a great teacher, and I really believe that history is the foundation for the future. People need to know what happened now so they understand that they don't make the same mistakes, so they can create greater opportunities for people. But they need to understand history, what worked, what did not, and how do we improve it. But you need a historical foundation to be able to envision the future. That's what I think about the next 100 years.
What parts of history or moments in history inspired you to take on these fights against higher education?
I think Gus Garcia, the lawyer, looking at the San Antonio Light. I think Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, and Richards, that took on challenges and made a difference. And I think my mentors, they led by examples. They were good professors. They guided you. They nurtured you. They wrote letters for you, etc. So I think it takes all those things. It takes a community to make a difference. Because again, you don't do anything by yourself. It's relational. Life is relational. And how we build those relationships and how we nurture them will determine where we end up.
Have you had people push back against that theory, the relational theory at all?
No, most people, when I tell them that, and the university created there's a sign at Texas State with my picture that says that, about being on task, being on time building, and people ask me, what do you mean by that? So I explain how relationships through graduate school, through your jobs, how some you stay with them, some you don't. Some relationships work, some don't. But as long as you understand that, you're going to be fine. But you got to work on the ones that work, because that's your foundation, that's your support system, etc., for your future.
What line do you try to walk between being a friend, a mentor, a dean to the people that you're mentoring?
It's a very fine line that you walk, because sometimes when you tell people the truth, they don't like it. Okay, so they need to understand me, and I'm there to help them. And I tell them, you might not like what I'm about to tell you, but this is why I'm telling you. And you can still go do whatever you want to. I don't require anybody to do anything I tell them to do. Okay? But if they look at my track record, they're going to find out that chances are I'm right. And there's a reason why I'm telling them. You know, it's an ongoing conversation with everybody. You know, an undergraduate student is different than a graduate student. If an assistant professor, faculty member that comes and seeks advice and guidance, you know, is different than a tenure professor who has a different request. Because everything is related to resources, and the resources could be money, information, or space. Could be any of those three things that we're talking about.
Has being a minority in a situation ever made you uncomfortable or scared to speak out or to say what you felt was right?
I am very calculated about my comments. I'm fearless. I have to be, okay? If I'm talking the truth, I don't have any fear. And the worst thing that could happen, I could lose my job. And I have the philosophy that I can always find a job. So that's how I approach things, but no fear, no fear.
Mm-hmm. How do you teach not having fear to students?
You know, it goes back to the whole experience as a migrant farm worker. When you don't have anything, when it's you, your mother, your father, and your brother, and that's all you have nothing to lose. Mm-hmm. So if you're telling the truth, you don't have no fear. That's my take on that.
Well, thank you so much for this interview, Chahin. I think that is my last question for today, but it has been a pleasure getting to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.